I'm sort of like a behind the scenes guy. I generally sort of get engaged in a community, but very cautiously. And it's really through having met Carol, incidentally. And Carol I met maybe 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. And Carol said, "Oh, you're a healer." And I came to her about advice on my job. And she's like, "No, you're a healer." And that really needed to sort of settle in, because other people had said that as well. I just wasn't actually ready to engage and participate there. Then through a fortuitous encounter with Dennis, Dennis ended up telling me about IONS. So that brought me to IONS, and seeing Carol there meant, this is a safe space. So my life has really been about putting connections together, looking at patterns, looking at things that are stabilizing ourselves wherever we are, because these kinds of incidences tell us the story actually of who we are. And it lets us know that we're kind of coming back to remember why we are in a certain place at a certain time. So what I'll do, I'll read a dedication from the book. So at the heart of this story is what I call a Grail event. And like all Grail journeys, no one can actually hand you the chalice. You have to really earn it. It's all through experience. We must actually go on this journey to reveal it to ourselves. This is the only way that we can actually teach it to others, because it has something about translation, is that it has to literally land within us. And then if we've gone on this journey, and this journey has revealed something to us that can actually help a community, it really is something that must be imparted. So that journey, because that mystery has been revealed, it really needs to go to the village. And the village or the society, the community, then goes on their journey. Because not everyone is going to always go on the journey for themselves. Sometimes all we're supposed to do is kind of inspire another person to go on that, because everyone here has something to reveal. You're all a fractal. You're all a part of the puzzle. And so without going on the journey, we'll never have access to what you have. And we don't know what that is, but everyone has something extraordinary, something extremely unique. And in these times, it's essential that we understand that. Okay. Do you want, I guess, play it without the sound? Okay, so again, this video is going to it's going to illustrate where in the middle of this journey I actually was in terms of the creation. So for the first 30 years, I was really a witness. And I'm going to get into that right after this, and I'll talk about what the witnessing was all about. The witnessing in the beginning of the journey is the initiation. We're being tested like you wouldn't believe, so that we'll be ready, because we're being asked. And we're actually asking ourselves. It's not like anyone is putting us in this position. So the call comes, and the call came early. So the way that it worked for me was very young. My first conscious experience of waking up, hey, this is a toy. I'm going to pick it up and play with it. So I start picking it up and throwing it and popping it around all over the place. And my father saw this and was furious. And he came over to me screaming, and because he wanted me to let it go. And I thought, oh my, what have I done? Like, this is a toy, this is a ball. I mean, I don't understand what I've done here. I start to cry. And then he explains that this frog has feelings, that this frog is actually really good for the planet and for the yard, because it's eating bugs. It's helping the plants. And then all of a sudden, I realized, oh my God, I just hurt this little creature. I didn't know that I could hurt a creature, because I didn't know that it actually was alive. It just was a thing that was bopping around. That began my awakening to realize that I am connected to something other than me. And so it was the part of the process. I became a very sensitive child. And I think if you scroll down, there you go. So that's my father, that's me. A little bit older than that, but basically, my dad had no awareness that he was changing my life at a very early age. Now, I wouldn't have known either that that was happening in that way, that he was changing my life. But I can tell you, I shared this with him about 5 years ago. He had probably no idea about that ever having happened because he didn't remember it. It wasn't so significant to him, but it stuck out to me. There's going to be things in your life for sure that are defining moments. And what I'm hoping that this presentation will do was get you to think back. What was a moment that actually might have seemed insignificant to everyone else around you, but it's something that latched on. There was something that was telling maybe a story for you that you needed to think about even more deeply. Yep. So then, around the age of 7, my parents told me that I was adopted. Now, for me, this was actually the perfect age. And sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, that's too young. For me, it was actually the right age because I was already aware. I was aware of the surroundings. I was aware that I was not like my friends. I was sensitive to all these other kinds of things, and no one else was really, involved in sort of that level of care at 7 years old. Everyone was having a good time. And I'm processing the mysteries of life in a way. And so when my parents told me this, I was sitting at the kitchen table and I just matter-of-factly said, okay, I know. And I said, are you going to tell my sister, who was younger? Because I wanted to deflect the whole conversation. I was not ready to actually deal with it. I understood what it meant. They explained they loved me, that they couldn't have children of their own, that they picked me, all this wonderful stuff. But I definitely was not ready to have that conversation because I didn't understand really what it meant. And intuitively, I knew they weren't ready to have the conversation either. And so I withdrew. Not completely, but I withdrew from the question because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. I didn't want them to think, oh, you're not good enough, because that wasn't what it was about. But I was a mystery hunter from the get-go. So not having the knowledge of what everyone else would be taking for granted was a huge question. And it didn't let go. So what I started to do was rifle around the house. Whenever my parents weren't around, I was in every suitcase. I was in the attic. I was in drawers. Where's the document? Where's the stuff? Of course, it wasn't there. So there was nothing to find, but I had to hunt. And so I continued hunting, much to the sadness, because it actually was kind of a growing sadness. There's not an answer. I'm never going to have this answer. Maybe at 25 or something, I should be thinking about that. But no, at 7, 8, 9, 10, I was desperate to know. So I went to this really great school, a public school, about 5, 6 houses down from where I grew up. Bunch of kids in the neighborhood. We all walked to school together. It was awesome. It was ideal. And this school was not a Montessori school by any stretch. It was just a regular public school. But every teacher there, or at least the ones I had, were transformative. This man, Joe Paglucia, was my first male teacher ever. And I was sort of a teacher's pet in school. I wasn't the greatest athlete, but I was very academic, and schoolwork came super easy, so I spent all my time there. I dreaded sports and competition that way. But Joe Paglucia was having none of that. In his classroom, you played sports. And it didn't mean that you were playing sports outside of school, but during school, you were definitely doing things. And Joe had talked to my mother during a parents-teachers conference, and he extolled sort of the academic side and everything, but he said, that kid, he's kind of a patsy. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time, and my mother, I'm not sure that she knew exactly that he was sort of saying he needs to toughen up. The kid needs to toughen up. So this memory of Joe, what he did to me, he put me in a basketball game as a center against this guy who was 4 times my size. Huge, huge. And he put me as center. But what he didn't know is that I have a real killer instinct. I will not give up. Ever. Ever. And the thing is, I don't operate that way with aggression. That's not my way. I'm very calm. I am like ridiculously patient. But I'm driven and will not stop. And that goes for everything. And that's why the whole adoption thing was such a huge question, because I was driven to get the answer where there wasn't one. There was a huge wall. Joe Pag, as we called him, put me up against this guy, Bobby. And I was on Bobby that whole game. And I think I did it to partially impress Mr. Paglucia, but also I got into it. And I was like, no, this kid is not going to beat me here. And so Joe Paglucia had Student of the Week every week. Well, I won Student of the Week that week, but not for the reason of anything to do with academics, but because he actually said this. He couldn't believe. He's like, that Mark Adams, I can't believe what he did with Bobby. So I got a 6-pack of Coke for Student of the Week, and my confidence soared. I felt like a new guy. So this was 6th grade. I had him for 5th and 6th. So that was definitely a defining moment in terms of becoming more of myself. Like he brought through something. I knew that I had the reserve in me emotionally to be all in, but I didn't know that physically and athletically I could be pushed and actually do it. So let me see where we are in this here. Yeah, so I call that the geometry of guidance, because he read something in me that he knew needed to be brought out. He recognized it and helped me to develop it. So this picture is actually taken in 2006, but I'm standing in front of this mountain called Ben Huna. Ben Huna. It's a wonderful mountain. It is actually behind my mother's home. So when I say my mother that raised me is my mother. Because I will talk about an adoption search that comes later, where there is some, discoveries there. But my mother is from Ireland. And so I grew up going to Ireland in the summer times. And my mother's house is in like this absolutely ridiculously beautiful location in Connemara, which is the west coast of Ireland. If you know the movie The Quiet Man, it was filmed right across the road. And John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara and Barry Fitzgerald used my mother's house as their dressing room. Yeah. So John Ford picked that location. And my grandfather, no, imagine 1950. Connemara, they don't even have electricity at this point, okay? And movie trucks are, site locating and stuff like that. And there's a man walking down the beach. My grandfather is at a fence looking, what the heck is going on here? And basically, he and Barry Fitzgerald are talking to my grandfather. My grandfather said, come on up for a cup of tea. It was like, we don't recognize you as celebs. Like, where was the local movie house in a village of 48 homes? It wasn't happening. So they didn't put the pretense of, these are major movie stars. They were just people who came to the house. My grandmother made tea and bread for them all the time. My mother sat on John Wayne's knee. It's like it just happened. And actually, there's no proof of this, but my grandmother, when she died, had $100 in her bank account, which at that time was a ton of money, which she was given that in 1950. In Ireland terms, Irish terms. So that was a gift from somebody that my grandmother didn't even share with anyone, but it was probably Barry Fitzgerald or John Ford, and said, thank you so much for the use of your home for this week, or whatever. But Ben Huna was very special to me. I was so lonely as a child. all these questions. Everyone else is playing, having a great time. I'm like, who's my parents? What's going on? And the other things that I had going on in my life too, these identity questions and all this kind of stuff, are all like really creating massive confusion. But Ben Huna was like this unbelievably great challenge, because Ben Huna was always there, and there was this beautiful stream. Like, my grandfather bought this house, I think in like 1920, late 20s, and it was right by a river, rushing river, that actually provided the house with fresh water. Imagine at a time when there's no indoor plumbing, you know? So he had a PVC type of, like a rubber tube that went from the river into this collection bin. That's where they got their fresh water. And the water came down from the top of Ben Huna, and I would travel up Ben Huna. My cousins were so ridiculously fed up with that whole situation, like, because they lived there. It wasn't like they wanted to do it, but I did. And I wanted to do it to get to the top and lay in the grass and go, one day, this will all make sense. And I would do it a lot. I climbed that mountain as much as I could. I got a lot out of my system. The mountain is incredibly dangerous, by the way. But no one seemed to care about that at the time. As a child, I didn't either, because you think you're going to live forever. But when I climbed it as a 40-year-old, here, I thought I was going to die. Yeah. And I remember my father climbing it for the first time at the age of 41, as we're bouncing up the hill. And my dad actually said, Mark, I can't do it. I can't do it. And I was so bummed that he didn't get to the top of Ben Huna. But then when I was 40, I got it. But I still made it. I did make it to the top. And that year, that was a very special, I don't know if it's somewhere else in the book, but I'll just cut to the chase on this one. I almost did give up. Seriously, I was climbing that mountain, and I was like, this is hard. And I run. I was in shape. I had no idea how many times I just bopped up and down that mountain as a child, and it actually was tough. So anyway, it was the kind of mountain that had all these landings. So every time you thought you were there, you weren't. You got to the top of the landing, there was another ascent. So finally, I had just had it. I wanted it, and I thought, you know what, maybe another day. I stood up, and this is amazing, but a wind gust came behind me, so powerful that I was actually leaning backwards into it, and it literally lifted me up to the top of Ben Huna, like I was running. That's how fast this wind was. I'm glad it wasn't coming this way, but like, it took me to the top of the mountain, and I mean, that was a very spiritual trip anyway, so I guess I wasn't that surprised, but it was quite amazing. And this is the last trip before, as a teenager. And this trip was kind of significant because basically I had it was just not a good summer. Kind of hit puberty, hormones, you know, all that kind of stuff. Now the intensity of the adoption thing is all happening. And so I ended up having a fight with one of my cousins. And I climbed to Ben Huna that day and said, one day it'll all make sense. And I'm not coming back to Ireland until it does. And Ireland was a place where all of the happiest memories were. Everything that I could do between the end of summer vacation through the next school year was focused on Ireland. So to not have that anymore was a real loss. I ended up going to a high school that freaked me out at first because it was an all-male high school. And as an academic and a non-athlete, I thought I was going to get my kicked every day. And so my parents kept driving us, or my family would want to go on a road trip past this school every Sunday after church. And it was to sort of coax the whole thing about going, which I was not. Definitely not. I was not going to get beat up every day, as I figured I was. But I also couldn't tell my parents the reason I'm not going is because I think I'm going to get beat up every day, because I was a tough guy. I didn't want them to think their son was this, you know, loser who couldn't defend himself. So I kept it bottled. Just another thing kept bottled up. You know, just keep on adding those things. So we often do it. So it was just another one of those things. But then I had taken the exam just to quiet everything, and just my parents said, if you take the exam, you don't have to go. Just take it, and then, at least you'll have it on record, and that'll be it. So I took the test, I got in, and I said, I'm not going. And that went on for 2 months. The deadline came, and I was safe. I did not have to go to Severian. I was so excited. I won. And then, in homeroom class, this girl sitting next to me mentions to another friend sitting like either 1 or 2 seats above me or in front, and my friend Karen mentioned that this guy, who was sort of the all jock, great looking, great student, was actually going to this competitor school. And I never would have thought that this guy would have gone to a private school. And so I went home that day and told my mother, please call Severian and do whatever you can. Please, I need to go to that school. Now, he was going to a different school. It wasn't about that. It was the recognition, I've made a mistake. I don't know why, but I have to go. And so my mother made the call, and they accepted me and went in. Now, why was that important? It was important for a guy who questioned himself to this degree, that he actually could really get along with all guys and actually loved that environment because it brought out another dimension. And also, at the same time, it introduced me to meditation. Because sophomore year, I had a class with the one sister who was at the school, and this class taught meditation, which I didn't really know anything about. But she used the Vangelis soundtrack to Chariots of Fire, and I ended up getting that album, and every night before going to bed would meditate. And that meditation was a tool to actually go forward in terms of everything else that was to come from this point forward. So the quest, it has come. And so that is all initiation, okay? I'm bringing up those things so I hope you can reflect on your own life and see that there were defining moments that changed potentially the course of where you were going. Maybe the fork in the road sort of appeared in your life, and you went one way and not the other. And maybe that way was the unexpected, and then all of a sudden, though, it completely changed everything. So those were defining moments. Those were things that were always operating in the background. Now that has happened, 1995 arrives. 1995, kind of the time in my life of the first Saturn return. And this is a big deal because of a few things. One of the first things that happens in a Grail Quest is you're going to end up deciding now is the time. And so all of a sudden in 1995, I have changed life completely. I have left the business world, and I've gone back to school full time. So what happened after graduating high school is for the 2 years, I went to college and had a fun time. I was no longer the academic. I was the life of the party. And that's really not great when your parents are paying your tuition. So they stopped that, and I ended up they gave me a choice. You can pay for it, or you can go to work. And so I ended up getting a job. And I had a really great job for 5 years. And it came up completely by accident. I'd been a waiter in a hotel, and my parents were like, you need to stop that. So you're going to get your life together. And I didn't know what to do. But I saw this woman taking people to lunch every day. And I thought, I can do that. I didn't realize that you actually have to sell. And that's why you take them to lunch, because you worked on getting them to come to the hotel, and then you try to get them to take the whole group. But this was a big deal because it taught me about cold calls. It taught me how to actually interface with other people, which I was very shy at that time. To think that I'd even be up in front of a crowd right now and not shaking back then would have been impossible. But it was a gradual thing. And it comes in very handy, trust me, because when I leave and go back to school, I get this impulse that Christmas break as I'm approaching it. And that impulse is now. Because years prior to that, 8 years prior to that, I had tried to fulfill the adoption search. I went to court. I went by myself. They appoint a guardian ad litem to open the file. And we didn't even really get that far. The judge basically said, do your parents know why you're here? And I said, yes. I told them why. I mean, I was 21 or 20. I said, yeah, I told them exactly why. And they said, well, what did they say? What do they think about that? And I said, well, they understand why I need to know this information. She basically chastised me in front of the entire courtroom that my parents didn't feel that way. And they were so incredibly hurt, but embarrassed to tell me how hurt they were. And then when I asked her when would be the right time to do the search, she said, never. And I just bawled my eyes out in front of the entire courtroom of strangers. And I thought, I can't ever do this again. But then, because of that job, and because of gaining confidence, I knew when the call came the second time, it was happening. So I did it again. This time, I didn't meet with the guardian ad litem at the courthouse, but I did meet at her home. A wonderful woman. She was now, I don't know whether she was doing pro bono work with the county or how it was unfolding, but basically, she listened to why I wanted to find my biological parents, and she agreed to represent me. So basically, she didn't even have to go before the judge. It just, she got the file. My mother was dead. I had no idea that that could be possible because I was only 27 or 28. So I was like, how is that even possible? The thing is, though, if your biological parent is dead, that file is closed permanently. Because if there's no consent that can be given, there's no way to proceed. The guardian was very legal in her mind. She understood that I was disappointing, but there's nothing that she could do. So I grieved for a day or two, and then I said, that is not happening. That is not happening here. I've waited how long? And the file's closed, and if my biological mother is anything like me, she's going to make sure that this information is in my hands. So I used every skill set that I learned over those 5 years, how to find any contact person anywhere. This is before the internet. This is 1995. My mother was dead and died in Ireland. She was from Ireland. I had no name. All I knew was that she was approximately 40 years old when she left this country to go back to Ireland. She had died and had been a nurse here. That's all I had. And I found her. In 2 days. In 2 days. I called the guardian ad litem back, and I said, I just want to ask you, I have a name, and if I give you this name, and I'm right, would you please have my file open? Because she had mentioned to me that my father's name was in the file. And she said, by law, Mark, I cannot do that. I'm sorry. And I said, okay, that's fine. I've already talked to the family, and this is who it is. And I gave her the name. And she said, how did you know? With that, because she didn't confirm, didn't deny, but said that, I said, please, would you represent me? Because you mentioned that my father's name was in the file. Would you represent me? Because that's the only way that I'll ever get the file open. And she said, absolutely. So she did. And the judge just went, accepted. So I got to read the file. But what I didn't know at the time was that this woman, and I didn't know this for 10 more years, this woman was the head of Catholic Charities before she retired and worked for the county. So when I was told by Catholic Charities, you cannot read your file, it does not happen. When I told them who my guardian ad litem was, they said, that's why you read your file. Because no judge was ever going to deny her. So, message and moral of the story, the call comes. It's strong. Do it now. I did it then. 10 years later, this woman was already retired and moving on. Like, I don't know whether she would have been there. The call comes, answer it. It's going to tell you everything that you need to know. So the quest is underway. Now, at the same time, I, like I said, have gone back to school. And while I'm in school, I want to help the world. And I wanted to become a social psychologist. So I thought that was the route. Well, I worked in the field for a brief period of time, enough to know that that was not my route, and I was not going to do that. But when I made that decision, after one too many draining days there as a mental health counselors spend a ton of time with patients, more than the doctors do. And so if you're empathic, as I am, and want to give, but at the time I didn't know how to protect myself, I gave it all, and I was drained. And so I was done. Like, I didn't care. My internship was coming to an end, and I was like moving on to something different. Not that. And I had a conversation with a guy during the last week there that changed everything. Not that I knew it in the moment, but it began to make me think differently about a particular subject. So anyway, this guy, who was just a few years older than me, came into the hospital. I think he had tried to kill himself because he was having auditory and visual hallucinations. So while he's in there, he's now medicated after like 3 days or something, and he's much more approachable and can have a conversation. So as we're talking, he mentions to me that he didn't want to kill himself, but this voice kept telling him to do that, and that voice had been with him since he was a teenager. This guy was totally rational. He was like, I didn't want to kill myself. And it wasn't that this lady, it was a lady, I guess. This lady was telling me to do it. He was just sick and tired of hearing the voice. And that was the only way to get rid of it. But I thought, so you get the visual hallucination, you get the auditory, and he said, yeah, but they've given me drugs to take away the visual hallucination. But the auditory hallucination won't go away. And I put it in this file, but it stayed with me as something, pay attention. And again, think about that stuff in your life. There's things that say, pay attention. Might not make sense now. Keep it over here. Okay, that's 1995. And I think we can go on, Dan. That's my biological mother. Okay. So now, fast forward to 1999. I've accepted a job in another state. Actually, no, I'm sorry. This is before I've accepted the job in the other state. A company was hounding me. I kind of became a name in Massachusetts for what I could do in these hotels. I could go into a hotel, and I had this knack of business development, which I didn't even know was a term. I could just go in and get them going. I knew every different market segment, and I knew the way to approach decision makers of each of those different segments in a very unique way. And I had this skill set. And so when I was being hunted by this other firm, I really was I hadn't worked out all the kinks, meaning I was afraid to leave Boston. It was familiar, and I liked family, and I felt safe and nested. But they kept calling, and I kept ignoring. So I go on this trip to San Francisco to attend a wedding. And while there, I go to the Palace of Fine Arts. And I don't know if have you been to the Palace of Fine Arts? Okay, so you know, it's amazing. And it was part of this 1915 exhibition. And it's like the only thing remaining, for some reason, of this entire exhibition. Very beautiful. It's this giant rotunda in a very Roman Greek style. And here's this guy who has all these metal rods sticking out of the ground. And if you can see at the edge of the rods are these rocks. Balancing. Like on their edges, okay? But then you'll notice, look at the brick. The brick's in the middle of the rod. And then he's got this one, sort of like the three rocks where there's just on its edge. Yeah, and the round rock is on the side, the face at the top of the stone. Well, anyway, I've never seen anything like this. And I literally felt lightheaded as I'm walking around this installation, like, this is wild. And I think he had a sign up that said, this is not a magic trick or something, you know. But you didn't need the sign. Like, you just walk around and it's mind bending. And so something said, ask him how he's doing this. So I walk up to him, and his name is Bill Dan, and actually in the book and everything I have all his information. So it's Bill Dan, and it's B Balance, B-E Balance. You can find him and look him up. He's got all these really amazing rock installations all over the place. But I said, how are you doing this? And he said, well, first, he said, come over, and he looked me up and down, and then he said, just motioned, I talk to the rocks, and they tell me where to place them. I was like, what? I believe you. Like, I have no idea, but I completely believe you. And I don't know what to do with this. So anyway, a couple days later, I was on Angel Island, which is beautiful, and it's right across from Sausalito. And it was a beautiful day. And I was just staring out at these gorgeous yachts across the blue water, looking at Sausalito, looking at, I think the bridge was in the distance. But anyway, I knew it's time. And so that's why I accepted the job. And I took the job, and I moved to New Jersey. Go on. Okay, so now I'm in New Jersey. So this is 1999. I have the experience of meeting Bill Dan. It's just like powerful. But now I've taken over this hotel in New Jersey. It's a disaster. But it gets me out of Massachusetts, which was probably a miracle unto itself, because I didn't think I'd ever leave there. But that trip in 1999 to San Francisco was like, yeah, no, you're ready. Do it. And I had never taken over a hotel. I wasn't responsible for that ever. So that was the other thing. Like, I don't know if I can do this. But I made a phone call to somebody and said, yeah, you can totally do it. So there was a confluence of things that made it all possible. Now I'm living in this house, rented house in New Jersey. And one night I wake up, or I think I wake up, or I have a dream. Or was it a dream? I have no clue. All I know is that I'm in my bathroom in the house, and I'm looking into the mirror. The bathroom looks exactly as it does, except what I'm seeing in the mirror is not my face. I'm seeing this disc, this absolutely gorgeous, iridescent, pulsing disc that's humming. Okay, that's weird. And there's a black dot in the center that then separates into letters. Now, I did this image. I have no idea what they were. They were glyphs of some kind. I don't know what they were, but there was 3 of them. And they looked possibly Greek. I really don't know what, and it doesn't even matter. All I know is that there were 3 symbolic glyphs that showed up, and that dream was so lucid that I couldn't forget it. So it wasn't about, this was not like, remember. This was like, you can't forget that. So that moment was on the heels of the Bill Dan thing. But I've also been deeply, deeply meditating. I've been really getting into it, and I have been asking bigger questions. So now I'm back in Massachusetts just for like a month. I'm at my parents' house, and I've been now introduced to David Bohm's work. David Bohm, and actually I skipped over a little piece, and I'll just briefly touch on this. Another call to the initiation was when I was about 16. So after the meditation started at Severian, which, by the way, was a Catholic high school. I grew up very Catholic with an Irish mother. So when I was 16, to say to them, I'm done. I'm not going anymore. Because I'm standing in church and everyone's doing the Lord's Prayer, and all of a sudden I just quiet myself and I listen to what was like a murmur, a mumbling. And I thought, How many times have I said this, and do I even really know what it means? How many times have these people said it? Do they even know what it means? Why am I saying this? And it was this, like, I can't do it anymore. And when I decide something, it's decided. So I wasn't going ever again, even when my parents the following Sunday literally tipped me out of my bed to go. I still said, I'm not going. And then they gave up. But here's the thing. This, to me, is very much the death and the resurrection experience, because no one prepared me for what came next. I was so elated. I had put a stake in the ground, and I wasn't going to church ever again. Congratulations. What's next? Well, I forgot to think about that. I didn't have a next. I had nothing. But the thing was, I already decided I can't do that. So it's like learning there's no Santa Claus, at whatever age, and then trying to pretend he really exists. You can't go back. I couldn't go back to the church. This thing that I loved the music, I loved the participation, getting dressed up on Sunday. I couldn't go back. It was over. And I had nothing to go forward. And so that is how I got introduced to mythology, to Plato, to Aristotle, to Pythagoras, looking, searching, trying to bridge my way back home, how to get there. And I only introduced this because it took a long time. It literally took, so that happened in 1982. And it wasn't until 1996 or 7 or 8 that I was really beginning to understand that there could be a bridge. And that bridge was in the form of David Bohm. For whatever reason, he spoke to me. His language was in communication, psychology, physics, behavior, geometry. He was putting words together like implicate order and holographic universe. And so these things spoke to me, but I didn't really understand them. But they spoke. And so I'm back in Massachusetts now, going back to 1999. We're just into 2000. And I have this vision that I'm not able to actually communicate, and I'm not a great drawer. So I got this impulse to go to the store and get black paper, white paper, some iridescent paper, and put something together. And I knew exactly how it needed to go. And basically, this is it. This is an actual photograph of that. So I've got the iridescent paper in a cone, and then down below it, I've got this black paper, and then these are white sort of ellipses on either side, and then there's a gold dot in the center, and then a line extending from the center out. So what ends up happening is that I then get this impulse to flip the poster board over. So I got foam core, actually, that I was gluing everything on, and the impulse said, flip it over, and now do the inverse of what you did here. That was my thought. When that happened, I was like, okay, this is something extraordinary. I don't know what this means. I think I might, to a degree, but there's something in this that is so layered and so complex. And look how simple it is. Black, white, little iridescence, and a gold dot. And that, to me, was so profound that it would take another 25 years, and it's still going, to unravel how complex this is. So what ended up happening is because I said I'm like a really bad artist, I drew out the best I could what if this was to be an animation. And it's not like I had a ton of cash back then, but if it had to be an animation, I needed sketches first, and then I would have the animation built around it. So I sketched them out as best I could, and I hired a company, and these are their renderings. Like, they totally knocked it out of the park. So they did a series of like 20 renderings, and they got it. Now here's the thing. They took what I had sketched to a degree, and they were tapping into me, for sure. Because all of a sudden, there's two big eyeballs right over here on the, if you're on Zoom, it's on the middle slide, sort of in the two, one in the center and the one to the left of that. And so basically that was a moment of, aha, we're onto something. So I asked them now to proceed with the animation. So these are some of the digital stills. You saw the animation. We started with that. And if you remember, there's a cone of light at the top. And that cone of light had a swirl going around it. Okay? And then it travels to this fulcrum, or the neck. And at the neck, or what I'm calling the 0 point, it connects with matter, or sound. So here we have two building blocks of the universe, because that is what I conceived. Light and sound. Light being infinite perspective, being infinite, like light travels the universe. We measure how old the universe is in light years. It's a very powerful medium. It also contains sound and light in photons. And then matter is the form. Matter is the building block of everything. Everything is created out of matter. And then we have words like mother, mater, stuff. It is the cradle that we're born in. And then we've got the infinite ideas above us. And so that's why what I knew in this was that there was a vortex of light and there was a vortex of sound. There was electromagnetism, electric light, magnetic sound. And then I realized, wow, what is the structure that could possibly contain this? And that's what was weird, because the structure was a cube. And everything you hear about is everything's round. But I knew, I can't tell you how or why, I knew it was a cube. And in that cube was the three-dimensionality of that vortex. So the way that I initially envisioned it was in this cube of an infinite stretch of these plasmatic panes of liquid plastic or whatever. We are walking through it constantly, looking through our eyes, shining the light that has come in. Our light is then going onto the movie screen of our lives as we're walking towards it all the time. And we're sharing the universe in a holographic way with everyone else who also shares in our experience. So this concept was tying into David Bohm and what he described as the holographic universe, because you don't have to go to the Taj Mahal to be at the Taj Mahal, because others have built it. Others have been there. It's in your field. You have access to it. We all have access to it because of that. But this now is playing into some other key roles. If light just travels infinitely, just travels with no return loop, then it's chaos. It's just diffused light. It goes nowhere. It means nothing. It has to come back. It has to return. So these, again, are just ideas that I'm playing around with. How is this light? How is it possible that I think that I live in a cube? How is it possible that I am a cone of light and a cone of matter? Like, it just seems so abstract at the time, because a lot of ideas have to be abstract until they become concretized in ourselves, in our mind, our body, and our spirit. I lived with the abstraction, super happy, because that allowed me to now take the next step. I had spent so much of my life in my head doing the logic, doing the science. This forced me to identify with the metaphoric simplicity of what this meant. And out of that came, and I think we can actually, yeah, so, oh, now it's not. All right, so this is the animation. I guess I stuck it in there. So here's that moving vortex of matter. And it's just moving infinitely inside this cone. And at the top, we've got this gorgeous vortex of Every hue imaginable. Now, this was done in 2005, so I mean, the technology wasn't there. But to me, it was pretty awesome. So anyway, this vortex of light, which represents infinite creativity, possibilities, ideas. And then there is you, your spark of inspiration that travels down the cone, meeting at that fulcrum, and sending your manifestation out into the universe encoded with light and sound and your creative spark. But on the other side is a non-physical representation of that manifestation in what I call stasis. It is the same as the physical manifestation, but it's protected in stasis. Okay, we can go on. And this is sort of an idea of the electromagnetism of what ends up getting created through the cube becoming a torus. So at the top of the cube were these open vortexes. Light, being electric, is centrifugal, so F-U-G-A-L. Whereas sound, being a centripetal force, these work in clockwise and counterclockwise motions to each other. One is spinning clockwise, the other one is spinning counterclockwise. That is creating energetic movement, which is creating a field that is feeding back into each other. And so this brought up this idea of the ring of recursion, is what I call it. So this ring is a Mobius, essentially. And you can see it around the fingers, the two fingers of this. It's this finger pointing out. Now, this finger is you. It could be you, should be you, with electricity dancing off its finger. Now, it's wearing in stasis this ring that is stepped. So this ring actually has 7 layers. All right, 7 layers representing sound, representing light and sound. The 7 stages of this, what I'm going to talk about as the five gifts and 2 promises. And it's also color-coded. The colors, there's 8 colors there. Those 8 colors represent the Roy G. Biv spectrum: red, orange, yellow, blue, green, violet, indigo. And there's magenta. Now, magenta is technically not something visible to the naked eye. But it's on the ring because it's very important, and we'll get to that. But the ring is in this field. So the ring is in stasis. It is not meant to be worn in physical reality. It has sort of the earmarks of The Hobbit, the conquest of the ring. Wearing the ring gives a level of power that was never intended, because the joy of living is in the journey and in the adventure. It's not about having the answers. It's about finding our way to the answers, because we're finding our way to ourselves. We are in a partnership with the monad. That partnership requires that we have complete free will to find out who we are so it knows who it is. And that's why there's so much unconditional love in this whole matrix, because it cannot exist without us. It can exist, but very lonely and very lost, because it will not know itself unless it knows us. So the ring is above this other Mobius. So this Mobius around the eyes. And the Mobius around the eyes is giving infinite possibilities, eternity, an internal unfolding. And then you'll notice there's a Y in between the bridge going down the nose. And that Y is cradling the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain. And in the very V of that is the pineal gland, is the choroid plexus, is the opportunity for having an interface backwards, back to where it all began. And I call the Y down the bridge of the nose the descent of the Y, the descent of the WHY. Why are we coming forward? Why have we decided at this time to do our soul journey? Why did we come? Why are we all here to discover from each other what our purpose is? So the why is more than just a letter, it's actually the question. And then you'll see under the eyes the recursion. There is this motion, electromagnetic energy feeding back in and around in this endless loop, this biofeedback loop. Another waking moment is little Corduroy here. Because Corduroy was my dog at the time who could not stay because I was moving into New York. And so Corduroy taught me this very valuable lesson. Because he couldn't come with me to New York, it had to go with someone else. And this person who was taking Corduroy just held him up, turned around, and took his little paw and shook it at me to wave goodbye. And I cried for probably 2.5 days. Could not stop. It's one of those moments, I don't know if any of you have ever had them, but essentially my heart chakra had so opened up, it had been so closed for so long. Corduroy changed that. Corduroy made the things that were going to happen with the mirror, what I noticed when I created the what I called the chrysalis, which was the butterfly-looking thing, and the eye, he made that possible because I was now open to understanding this is not scientific anymore. This needs to go the path of understanding through metaphor. Now, I think we can go ahead. Okay, so now enter the 5 gifts and the 2 promises. So in the book, I get into I have to sort of go through this really fast because there's a lot to go through here. But there are several laws in the universe that are what I consider immutable. And these are very important because to think of them in any other way is to sort of do injustice to the system that was created for us. And one of them would be the law of unconditional love. Okay? There can only be love, unconditional, or there's conditional love. You can't have both. Unconditional love means that for no other moment in time has there ever been a negative thought or a should have been this way. I should have done that. Doesn't exist. It's either unconditional or it's not. And that is very important because deciding where any one of us stands on that alone decides how we see the universe. Bottom line. Because it will inform every other decision that we make. If it's a conditional universe, then it is. It's random, it's chaotic, it's wrathful. Sometimes it's good. But we've got to decide. We don't have, and that's part of it too. We don't have time anymore to not be solid in our choices of these very critical things. We are running headfirst into a storm that's very fixable, very fixable. But it's through conscious creation that we do it. And we have to be aware of the creative gifts that we've been given in order to make all of that happen. And that's really what this whole soul translation talk is really moving towards. But so the law of unconditional love, that's preeminent. And then there's the law of duality. All right, so we've got a spectrum of things, and each of them has its opposites. They're polar opposites, whatever they might be, whatever that subject is. Say it's good and evil. There's going to be a scale of that in terms of where a person fits on that scale. So it's up to us as these sovereign creators to be able to figure out where we want to be on the scale. We have total control. We can decide. No one's going to control us, or they shouldn't be controlling us. And I can tell you, the monad is not going to control. Because the monad can't create and understand itself if it manipulates. If the monad says, you're going to do this in this lifetime, that's not unconditional. It has to be, at its core, free will and sovereignty or not. It's got to be chosen. We either are completely free or we're not. And so these are not sort of like, a Sunday brunch conversation. This is literally the focus of life. Like now, we don't have time to just like play around with it and wonder. We have to get very serious and decide on these critical things because they're not like, I wonder, I'll get to that tomorrow. No, it's unconditional or conditional. Period. There's either the law of duality or there isn't, that there's only one thing. So the 5 gifts and the 2 promises are like this. They're really the metaphors for what came out of the chrysalis and the eye. The 2 promises are not in our control. The 2 promises are the monad's control. They mean there's infinitude ahead of us, and there's the potential for imminence, meaning that at a certain divine time, if we're paying attention, there is the opportunity for transcendence. That is our gift. And transcendence, like the Grail chalice, is something that's earned. It is an incredible reward. All of us have had a moment of epiphany. And the epiphany is this moment of transcendence. It's the aha, I get it. I know it now. I didn't know it before. I get it. And I've had many of those as I've been writing this book. And one of them was super, super major. And I can tell you something, when I got it, I wish I had written the time down, because I didn't. I wished I remembered the thought just before it, but I can't. The moment passed. It went away. But I can tell you, in the moment that it happened, it was like bliss. It was so satisfying. It changed my whole understanding of a whole bunch of different things. But I could not get back to that thought, because you're not supposed to. That's the ring. The ring is the promise of the moment of transcendence. It's the magenta. It's the invisible. You'll get it. We can't show it to you because it's not physical. You can't own it. You can't keep it. You can't lock it down. It's moving really fast. And it's not visible. That's why it's magenta. And that's why I call it the 8th note. I call it the mystery. It's in between the G of one octave and the A of the next. It just exists. You can't put a time on it because it is the now. That's the now. We can look backwards, we can look forwards, but we cannot ever capture. We can call this the present because we can never actually identify the now. So that moment of emotional aha is the gift. It's a huge gift because what it does is it changes your entire frequency. It moves you to the next octave, and now you have access to different things that weren't there before, that will start to show up. Okay, so do I still have you? Okay. Okay, so that's why I called it the 8th note. The 5 gifts, they are inspiration. Yeah, we can probably fly through these. Inspiration, intuition, imagination, intention, impedance. Okay, intuition. This is water. It's mother. It is matter. It's the conflict resolution between feeling separate and feeling connected. These are conflicts that we all need to resolve within ourselves. If we feel separate, we don't have access to our guidance. So our intuition cannot work properly if we don't feel connected to it. It means we don't trust the information that we're getting. So intuition means we've got to approach it that the guidance is implicit and it's hearing us. Are we listening? Inspiration is the difference between being motivated, pushed to do something, or pulled towards something as an act of consecrating this desire. Are you to the point where you can't even sleep because you just can't wait to get it done, inspired? Or are you, oh my God, another thing I've got to do today. Mundane, boring. That's motivation. Then we've got imagination, the fire in our minds to come up with all these brand new ideas and all these different new ways of approaching things. It's the difference between imitation or invention, where we can actually become this creator of something that's so original, no one's ever done it before, because it existed within yourself and you translated it. And then there's intention. That's the manifestation come true. That's the earth plane. That's when you draw it in. But all the way along this, there is this thing called impedance. And impedance is not resistance. It's moving a person towards harmonic resonance with the manifestation. No one wants a manifestation to arrive before it's time. No one wants it to arrive incomplete. So by listening to our intuition, by refining with our imagination, by recognizing, do we really want this? Are we pulled towards it? These are in our control, complete control. The sovereign in stasis and the monad is never going to interfere with any of those things, but will guide as much as they're asked. But they cannot interfere. It is a policy of non-interference, because then there's no free will. So again, it's either free will or it's control. Got to decide where you stand on that issue. Okay? Because the only one who can really decide what's best for yourself is yourself. So those are the 5 gifts in everyone's control. The 2 laws that are immutable are illumination and what was the other one? Sorry. Thank you. So illumination and then the immanence. Those are the 2 that are in complete control of the monad. Okay. Now we've got some core competencies. I'm going to run real fast through these. So these are all the support mechanisms as part of the soul translation process. So the creative things are what we just mentioned as the 5 gifts, 2 promises. Now these are some of the things to get connected with in terms of how you are going to work your way towards those manifestations. Support. This is bridging the span between the impossible and the possible. It is knowing that there is a way across any channel. Reflection. This is very important, because this is the opportunity to take it in, introspect, and put it back out in terms of observation. And reflection is also really key to the mirror. So one of the things that is so key with the mirror is that when we look in the mirror, we see the exact inverse. We do not see ourselves as straight on. We see the exact opposite. Exact opposite. Now there's a reason for that, and it kind of goes back to my dream or whatever with the mirror. Was I seeing myself? Was I seeing the monad? Was I seeing both? I don't know. But what I can say is that Silicon Valley certainly enjoys silicon and silicone. And the interesting thing about that is those are incredible transducers of information. And transducers of information that store memory. And mirrors are made with silicon. Now there's a reflective aluminum or silver backing. But even if you're walking past glass, you can still see your reflection. You don't see it as clearly without the metallic reflection agent in the back. So you're seeing and you're not seeing yourself straight on in the glass either. You're seeing a reflection. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to cut to the chase, because it's very important. Where all of this was going, and you can go to the next slide, is that perspective also creates our reality, our opinions, our beliefs. But think about this. Are they our opinions? Are they our beliefs? Or are they someone else's? That article that we read, did that person get influenced by this person and that person? Did someone 50 years ago have a conversation with somebody that influenced that author who ended up influencing that writer who talked to that person? Causality affects everything. So we have to have discernment at all times. At all times. We have to know ourselves through intuition, through our bodies, to make sure that we're connecting with the right information. Is it true to us? So, let me go to the next one. And so that comes into information. Information is basically about stuff that's getting in. Communication is what we're putting out. We have to be careful with our words. Words are very, very, very powerful. It's a building block of the universe. So I will share something that was interesting. On the way towards, this whole revelation, was I was thinking about the hum in the mirror. And a lot of people who do mantras and stuff like that, they'll go, Om, right? And so they're doing this, and that was kind of the hum in the mirror. But it got me thinking, okay, if that's the monad in that stillness, and I'm thinking, we are in an image similar to the monad on a physical level. I'm not saying that there's any physicality whatsoever in the sense of an anthropomorphic sensibility to the monad. I'm saying that we're in an image that possibly is the ideal candidate for a represented, or like a glyph or a symbol of what the monad would like to look like if it looked like something. So here it is. Well, there's a moment of insight that to me, and it's a story, but I believe it has some validity. A moment of insight in which motion happens. Motion's so important to thought. All thought is in motion, consciousness. Now go to the next letter. N. Oh, I have to move our tongue. So we want to try it for yourself. Go to and then do Do you see what happens? Yeah, there's movement. The tongue. All of a sudden, it's not just kumbaya. Motion, decision, insight has to happen. Okay, who knows how long that went on? But then, okay, and here's another piece. I just breathed because before you do the okay, that H is so sacred. And isn't it actually kind of the eighth note? G, A, in between an H, maybe? So, I thought, here we go. And I thought about the bridge line of the chrysalis with the center line and the opposite and equal action and reaction. The breath line, right there, separating magnetism from electric. And yet the whole thing surrounded in what is electromagnetism, which is unconditional love and everything else. And so now there was the ability to go from what was once this big circle with a dot in the center that spiraled and spiraled and spiraled and spiraled and spiraled until it knew another dot. So you get these geometries like the Vesica Pisces and stuff like that, and the dot in the center. And all of a sudden, it was dawning on me that we've got some serious geometry going on. You can probably scroll. Yeah. Okay. Still point. That's sort of the prima causa. Actually, maybe go to the next one. Here is a leap. Okay. After the chrysalis in the eye, I realized that that was key to something. And after I started writing about the intuition and the inspiration and impedance and all these things, as the metaphors, I did start going back into a little scientific stuff. And I found an image of the rods and the cones of the eye. And what jumped out at me is the larger blob. Now, of course, it's not perfect, like crystallized, but it really looks like a dodecahedron. And on the other side, you'll see the rods. And those rods look fairly hexagonal. Now they're very blown up here, but that's when the leap happened about the geometry of the eye. Because all this time in the back of my head is that conversation I had with that guy who said, I can't get that voice to stop, but the hallucinations have gone, the visual ones have gone away. So when the eye showed up on the poster board, and then I saw this, I thought, is there something to do, potentially, and this is the very early stages, of the imagination inverting things, or the imagination potentially projecting out of the eyes something into the energy field being the cube, or whatever, where this person is receiving something that seems real. And as I mentioned before, photons, or biophotons, encode light and sound. That's how your television set or your iPhone picks up the stream photonically. That's why it plays music on your phone, or whatever. The phone is built to receive photonic information. And probably your smartwatch is biophotonic, who knows. But basically, the rods and the cones were now speaking a language that needed some exploration. So the dodecahedron, looking a lot like a diamond, has all of these different faces. And then in the center was the pentagram, or the pentagonal, around this dodecahedron, containing each other. So I really started to play with that. The image of the rods and the cones that were blown up, the dodecahedron in that image did not look flat. So that's why it jumped out at me as this potentially faceted thing, which is probably gelatinous, so it doesn't actually have the crystalline edges in that same way. So this is from Plato. The dodecahedron in the universe, the dodecahedron with its 12 pentagonal faces, is not tied to a tangible element, but rather the shape of the universe itself. Plato saw the dodecahedron as embodying the wholeness of the cosmos, reflecting the boundless mystery of the ether of the heavens. So now I was beginning to formulate a hypothesis that the geometry of the body was in fact a roadmap to our connection back to source in every way. So I recognized that we say things all the time. Hey, look at that person square in the eyes. Why? The eyes are round. Are they? We have clues everywhere that are leading us to the truths. We just have to actually not see them as allegorical. All right. So then the rods and the cones. The rods are far more numerous than the cones. But the cones, what's interesting about them is the cones are related to muons. Now, muons are these vibrating little pieces of energy that are constantly moving. So even when our eyes are shut, our lids are down, we're still receiving muonic light. And it is why we have REM sleep and why it's so active in our eyes, because these muons are going through us, going through our mind and stimulating things. So then, basically, I was discovering language that's being spoken through something called Phi-Re, or the original language of glyphs, of signs, of the M, the N, the H, the O. Back to the ring of recursion. So the ring of recursion, actually I think the next one. Here's where things get interesting. So now back to geometry and Pythagoras. Pythagoras had really made a dent on me very early on. Now Pythagorean logic is that whole tetrachus, basically the point connected to another point, creating the square as the perfect form. But it also contains the circle. It also contains all these triangles. But back in his day, the H was considered the 8th letter. It was eventually moved to a 7th letter, but it was the 8th letter. And this, to me, is the insight that Pythagoras made, and it was destroyed shortly thereafter. That H, which creates the tesseract, 2 pillars with the breath line going across. and the, okay? When those are placed on either side of the cube, at the top of the cube and on the middle, in the middle of the cube, it creates 8 cubes. The tesseract now, you go to the next slide, creates an infinite number of cubes. Now, that's almost like a Merkaba. It depends on how you're looking at it. So if you're looking where that bright light is and you go directly above it, and then you can actually see the cube, but then sometimes it looks like a 6-sided form. So what Pythagoras' leap, in my opinion, was to bring the H and the structure into the equation, because without the structure, there is no form. There's blob, but there's not the infinite ability to create form. So his H was putting the monad into the creation. What that meant was the creation was also in us at all times. There's no, it's here. It's actually in us. There is no separation at all. The tesseract, when it's a cube, I think you can go to the next one. I might have maybe another one. Maybe another one. Again? Another one? Okay. So basically, a tesseract is a cube within a cube. So if you can look it up online. There's an image in here somewhere, but I don't remember where. And the reason why that's important is one is higher than the other. And it's at an angle. So those angles create the recursion. That light gets bent. And as it gets bent, it creates the recursion. And so it allows the light to come back into the vortex. That creates memory. That's how memory's stored. You know, you can go with the Akashic records and all that kind of stuff. Nothing you've done ever is lost. It's always accessible. The Tesseract gave us that. That was when God, or whatever you want to call it, was in the picture. But they took God out of the picture. They gave us anthropomorphics, wrathful ones, but they took God out. They took it out of you, they took it out of me, and they took it out of us, unless we found our way back. Unless we found our way back to the eternal exhale. Until we do that, we're sunk. There's no time. There's no time. We have to take the inhale and the exhale seriously, because that is where everything exists. There's no God outside of us. God is inside of us. Always has been. The feeling of loneliness, the feeling of separation, the feeling of not being heard, is all on us. It's because we've been led to believe we're not being listened to, or the thing that happened is the disaster that's destroyed our life. Instead of it being the moment of an opportunity to go, what am I doing next? This is really amazing. I'm not saying that, like, you know, I haven't been ticked off at my life about things that have happened. Yeah, because we can forget so easily. But the thing is, we don't have time. We've got to remember the H. There's a group called the Atomists. Nothing to do with my name. Atomist. These are the beginning of the resurgence of the evil. Now, they're evil because they're just materialists. They want control. And they're everywhere throughout history. There were probably atomists before the atomists. I mean, it just exists. What the atomists did is they collapsed the breath line and they formed the X. They took the line out of the H. They created twin pillars, and in the center was them. That was the beginning of the material universe. That informs Descartes. That informs a lot of different agencies and institutions, etc., where you don't exist other than a material form. You don't have sovereignty because they're God, not you.
And this is the epic battle, the epic struggle that humanity goes through periodically. But we're there. X marks the spot. Okay? And it's on all of us. It just is where it is. So that's how we have to change. Now, we can change in so many different ways. Going back, because we just have a few more minutes, to the guy in that hospital. He got me thinking about neuroscience, psychopathology. There needs to be new ways to approach conditions that are considered medicalized. That person could have such a sensitive interface. Most of you probably already know that the pineal gland contains apatite, magnetite, and calcite. These are piezoelectric, just like the pyramid is piezoelectric. It conducts electricity through the pineal gland. And what's really weird, and it blows scientists' mind, is that so much blood goes through the pineal gland. It's very strange because in the human brain, there's a blood-brain barrier with the choroid plexus leading the charge on that. It separates these things. And yet the pineal gland, where light goes through, the seat of the soul, as they say, where intuition is, where the light comes in through our eyes, hits our optic nerve, goes through that interface, and if we can accept that that interface literally places God or the monad directly in the center of our mind, we're not separate anymore. As a matter of fact, all we're doing is recognizing that our sovereign in stasis and the monad made a pact with us. It's a pact of unconditional love in which they said, we will never at any time interfere in your life. You are loved completely. We don't know anything else but love. That's all you are, is complete love. Every time you ask guidance through the interface, through the recursion of the tesseract, we will send you infinite ways to connect with your question. We're not going to give it to you like that. But when you're walking down the street, you run into someone that you haven't seen in 10 years. And they say something to you that just like profoundly blows your mind. Or you flip open to a page of a book that actually has the answer to something that you were thinking about 3 years ago. And like, oh my God, that's you talking to you. And giving moments of imminence, not necessarily the eighth note imminence, because that's usually to a big, big, big question. But it's still imminence nonetheless. What we have to do is connect with our breath again. Realize that every nuanced thing that's going on in our lives, even this like breathing in and out, is actually by design to connect us with the monad. The monad and the sovereign in stasis are the same. They were both created with unconditional love, and all we're doing, like that spiral that was in that diagram, showing that it was looping around the creation to the point where the light arced. That's the aha. That's the roller coaster loop. When the light arced on that orb that was being formed, that's the moment of direct resonance with what was created originally emotionally in stasis. Now, on the material plane, you've reached resonance. And now it's ready to come into manifestation on the earthly plane. So, this also has implications for dementia. It has implications for Alzheimer's. It has implications for dyslexia. Someone who's looking into the mirror, they can automatically see, we're seeing the inverse. What if the eyes are so sensitive, or the interface is either sensitive or damaged, and the light, as it's coming in, the way that it's refracted back, maybe one eye is stronger than the other. It comes back at different rates, and the letters get reversed. We medicalize, we punitize, we damage so many people unnecessarily when there is a geometry all around us that can tell us where we need to make corrections institutionally as well as physically, emotionally, etc. I covered a bunch. There's more, but we're kind of out of time. Does anyone have a question Okay. Oh,
Familiar faces. I live in Charlotte now. I came way too late. I have so many questions. One is, have you ever been in Lexington where they walk the you have to go?
okay.
There's not words enough to say how I thank you on what you verbalized, what most people experience or feel, or thank you very much for that.
Thank you for saying
I
that.
am
Yeah.
trying to give one question so that I don't take a lot of time, but is it true that what do you call that thing, the rainbow, has now a new color in the rainbow?
That isn't, well,
There was something turquoise, or is it the color that you mentioned?
oh, the magenta?
Yeah,
Oh, wow. No, I don't.
I have heard that, but I don't know if it's true, so I'm planting a seed.
Thank you.
There's so much that I can ask, but thank you so much. I'm so
thank you.
thankful. But what about what's that one called? Bipolar disorder.
Honestly, I think that everything can be broken down
Yeah,
into these geometries. So in
Yeah.
other words,
absolutely.
think about energy. Energy in motion creates opposites going on. So you've got this going, centrifugally, and then you've got the centripetally moving. And that's an anxiety disorder. There's mania, but there's also depression. So one is like too much, and the other one is too little. And so what I think happens, and I'm not saying that everything would be, that if they were to do a CAT scan or an MRI or something like that, that they wouldn't find glial cells that are bunched together. But I think sometimes when these discoveries are made, the damage has been ongoing. In other words, if that interface is atrophied from neglect, and a person just doesn't recognize that it's atrophied, or it's been slowly atrophying, or atrophying because we haven't, been working that muscle or something, that the implications can be in the deficits going forward that manifest as a label of something. But I think that the corrective things are along the way of noticing that something's not right. Whether, with bipolar, there could be a chemical thing that starts it for some, but it could also be something that is generated hormonally later because of what's happened between the mind.
I think that it's like frequencies that don't match up, like that can't find each other. There's a break somewhere.
All right, perfect. So thank you for saying that. So in that holographic field, what we're sending back through our eyes is the collection of our holographic field. So everything that's in the holographic field, second by second by second by second, is going through the eyes, going through the interface. Stasis is going, okay. Checking it out. It's refining it, understanding it. It's not telling, but it's refining and understanding and sending it back. So now we have a shared reality. But when a person has a ton of obstacles and blocks in their energy field, it's hard for that resonance to actually happen. It also means that they could be sending information that's not resonant either. And it's not the job of the stasis to smooth that out. But when it's sending out information, it's kind of like what I'll say about like the hallucinations, the visual. What I think can be happening there is something's happened in the field of that person that is so distorted that it goes through the eyes, through the interface, and it goes into stasis, and it comes back. But stasis goes, this is really weird. Creation's typically layer by layer by layer by layer by layer. But all of a sudden, there's this strange entity in this person's field. How'd that get there? So it's trying to figure out how it got there, and it just sends it back because it doesn't even know what to do with it, and the field is distorted, and the field doesn't know what to do with it, and the person who's living the experience doesn't know what to do with it, and it just compounds and compounds and compounds. But I think a lot of it has to do with the interface and, like you said, the field, because the field is our resonant capacitor. Our field contains everything. The energy work that I do with people, and it's now I have a way of explaining it because I didn't in the beginning. I used to call it electromagnetism. And it didn't land with me or other people, and I always felt like I don't even want to talk about it anymore. I just want people to find me because I don't know how to talk about it. through doing this book, I know how to talk about it now because I heal with my eyes. It's not that the eyes are doing the specific work, but I have, over the last long time, decades, been talking through the interface, searching, seeking, asking. My interface relationship is really tight. And I trust the information that comes through. So when I work with somebody, and I always said, I'm connecting with source, I'm connecting with source, I'm the conduit. Yeah, that's totally the case. But it's because I'm connecting with my stasis, and because stasis also contains the other person's stasis, that's the collaboration between all parties. So I am, in fact, healing with my eyes because it's coming in, the information is going out here, and it's helping me understand where I should be working. So I use a pendulum, and the pendulum, that's why it's telling me exactly where I'm working, and that's how the healing's happening. It's through the field and through the interface and through the fact that there's never been a separation. Okay. Thank you.
I just found you so fascinating. I was an MRI tech.
Oh.
So I have the visualization of what you're talking about. And all of our atoms are processing. And the MRI machine is a magnet that aligns all of our molecules along the line, north-south, by introducing the magnet, which all of our molecules have hydrogen. H2O has a slight electrical charge. And so they align up, and then we introduce the other force that knocks everything off kilter and that pops back, and the image is created by the movement because each of our molecules move differently. Liver molecules move differently, and so it's just really, everything that you said is really fascinating to me. And maybe the stasis is like the magnetic field that we go into. That big machine is a magnet.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for saying that because I am not a scientist. I'm a lay guy. So when I hear that kind of stuff, and I have a whole chapter dedicated to where I believe this work can go, it means so much to hear from someone, because unfortunately, like in the metaphysical community, it's sort of like airy-fairy, and it always needed, to me, a bridge where both exist.
Well, the gentleman that created the Noetic Society, I read that book when he wrote a book about his transformation upon coming back to Earth and seeing the Earth, and created this metaphysical searching to, Tom put it really well, to connect the science with metaphysics. I'm probably saying it wrong. I'm not very impeccable in my word. I want to be. The other thing that I found really fascinating was your picture, and you had the Y. Our pineal is right behind where the pituitary is, and the pituitary sits in the sella turcica, which is shaped like that. It's a Turk saddle, so it's shaped like that Y. So
you're giving me chills.
I just thought it was interesting.
Well, thank you so much. I have to tell you, this artwork has been created, and I would send it to people. I didn't know what I was creating, and that's the truth. It took me years to figure out what these images meant. So I didn't create it in that way. I created the image because it explained to me what I knew but couldn't put to words. When I saw the image, then I could put it to words. One thing I want to share about, because the MRI, doesn't it work gyroscopically a little bit? An MRI, does it have two different tubes?
No, it's on and off with the magnetic field.
Okay. One of the things that I talk about, and I think it's one of the images there, my concept with the eye and the interface is that it is a living gyroscope. I believe that is where through the blood and through the choroid plexus, through that fluid, I believe it creates a kind of gyroscope in which there's constant motion behind that. And that is what projects the information into stasis and allows it to come back in the same way.
Well, it's interesting too, the whole time element. This is way out there, but I read A Wrinkle in Time when I was really young, and they had the Tesseract. in the wrinkle in time. It's a big part in mitochondria and all this stuff. So when you're bringing up the tesseract, I'm thinking in all your speaking, the piece that I didn't hear about was time, because I'm really fascinated with the time-space continuum.
And that is in the infinitude thing.
Okay.
That's the mystery, because time is the inescapable. In other words, here's the thing. The monad exists in the now. The monad doesn't understand past, present, future in the way that we do. And that's the dichotomy. That's sort of the duality, is that the monad is at the opposite. So it's in the now. It is in the immanence of the eternal that. And we give it the understanding of, oh, that's what it feels like to have a birthday, or, to be able to look backwards and forwards, because it isn't looking that way. It's just love. And so it's such a hard concept to really just accept, because we live on a breath line. It created the breath line for us. That's why we have a material plane. It's a flat line. When we die, we go back to a flat line, right? I mean, it tells us. It spikes along the way, our amplitude, our frequency, and then it flat lines. Because where did we go? We went back to the breath.
Well, maybe love is that magnetic field.
It's electromagnetic. Absolutely.
And the electric impulses that knock it off and back are our experiences.
That's good. That's good.
I really want to come see you.
Oh, thank you. So, and this is the last thing I want to talk about, because it's interesting with the eyes again. So when babies are born, right, they don't see right away. Now, the way that I interpret that in this model is that here they've been cradled in this amniotic fluid, which is of a different material. It's really matter. Sound, right? Water is, and all those kinds of liquids, blood, those are more magnetic. So here it is in this cradle love, and then all of a sudden, shockingly, it's out into this ridiculous light that is probably fluorescent and ugly and awful and all these, energies around it, and it doesn't adapt right away. It takes a little while, but it does connect. It does resonate more with its other senses and stuff like that. So there's something else called, I'm going to say it wrong, strabismus or something like that. Babies can be, not all, but some babies can be born cross-eyed, or one eye could be off. And I think that has something to do with the soul interface. I think that there's something going on that is continuing through the birth process, in which it's taking a little bit longer. Some of it will just resolve normally on its own, but other times, because I did know a child when I was growing up who had to have that surgically corrected. So it's hard to know. But I mean, if a child doesn't see right away, there is something to do about the eyes maybe adjusting from the luminescence of the immaterial world to the false light of the material world. Because their eyes will become the keys to everything. When we see someone, when we're having a conversation, when we're looking in someone else's eyes, and I hope you'll take this with you, you're looking at God or the monad directly. This is why wars should never happen. This is why nothing should ever happen, because we're literally looking at extensions of ourselves. That's why the X has to go. We have to be this line. We can't be the cross-eyed people anymore. We have to acknowledge that this is the only truth, because this truth is finite. Material is finite. The breath line, infinity, time, is eternal. We can't touch it. It's immaterial. We can glimpse it, but we can never touch it. Totally. Yeah. Right there.
Brilliant presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last night I listened for 3.5 hours on this podcast. Are you familiar with Robert Edward Grant's work with?
Okay. This is so weird because
what you have said, he has, the architect, and I'm not really big into the AI thing as yet, but when I listened to it, this was something about the consciousness of breath from millions and millions of years ago, that it's the breath consciousness and it's mirroring his consciousness from, I don't know when, but the presentation, it was so much information, it's hard for me to reiterate it all. But it's really so much similar to what you're saying, and I think it could supplement some things that you are saying. But his name again is Robert Edward Grant, and she, the female that was speaking, but it's so much about the breath consciousness, and it talks about the monad and so much more. So are you familiar with his work at all?
Okay, so oddly enough, Tammy Lucent, who's here today, she sent me a video 5 days ago. And I heard the opening line and I sent her WTH because I thought, what is going on here? The synchronicity, and now she was like, this is the timing and all that kind of stuff. At first because I was writing the book. So I'm like, that was kind of freaky, but I think it's an indication that we have to get super solid in this stuff, because the way that the universe would work, in my opinion, is it has to reveal before we deny. So we have the opportunity and the free will to say, I'm not interested. You know what? I'd rather, and I've been guilty before, watch The Real Housewives or whatever, rather than actually hunker down and accept the depth and the breadth of really what's available to us. Because anything that acts as material focused is only going to, like you think about CERN, okay? Here are people that are trying to split the atom. Why? I know, but why wouldn't somebody be way more interested in just accepting that the mind of God is infinite and immanent and full of unconditional love? Why split it? Why can't we just find a way to work with it and use, instead of machines, we're the machine. We're the machine.
Well, the information that she said was really stretching, something that took way far out. I hadn't thought about, but I was just curious if you were familiar, I had heard anything about it.
Haven't listened to it. I mean, I'm sort of, I never want to be influenced.
Yeah.
Because this book comes from like my own influences.
Right.
So I think once I release it, and by the way, because we're closing up here, there is book 2. I just want you to know, if you like this, what's coming next changes everything. Because this is the precursor to understand why translation is so important for all of us to do for ourselves and for other people, to become soul translators for everyone. But what I feel like came to me through the 60-year process was a transmission. And in that, there was layers upon layers upon layers, but it took someone to basically say, I'm committed to understand what it all means to the end, until I can finally say, that's it. And to be able to then go, here you go, and you do with it what you want. And that's what is next. So about 3 months, 3 or 4 months, and we'll be there. But thank you very much for being here today.